This is a class about consumer choices, the business of entertainment, and entertainment, new media, personal technology, personal finance, investments, pensions, public and private, housing and real estate, business, both domestic and international, finance, economics, personal investments. It's targeted to, I can talk about almost anything here because one of those topics probably describes what you're interested in. I try to target it to as a broad interest as possible and to all different levels of financial sophistication or business sophistication, because someone may be very deep in one knowledge area and just have a little bit of knowledge in a different area. And I wanted a class that would generally appeal to OLLI members. Of course, I use multimedia presentation resources. It really is a challenge when they put this program together as a video program. Trying to get the PowerPoint, sometimes trying to get the videos to work within that. So let's start here. How many is the first time to Money News? Any? Oh, wow, good. Welcome, welcome. Any new members here? First name again? Elizabeth, welcome, Elizabeth. Robert, welcome, Robert. Jim, welcome, Jim. We have a lot of Jims, so you may have to use a different name. It's kind of like Hollywood. You have to register a name. We have 2 Jim Monroes in OLLI, by the way. Is the other Jim Monroe here? Yep. That's right. Not. Goes by the name James Monroe when he emails me. Okay, about me, you know my stuff for the political class, I won't go through that resume, but for a time before I went into government service, I owned a small business and enjoyed that and was challenged by all the aspects of being in business that people have in those days. And then I went into municipal government management for 30 plus years. Okay, I use a number of sources to bring you topics. My primary source is Wall Street Journal, New York Times, The Economist magazine out of the UK, a variety of secondary sources. All of these are on the website. And then I have alternative sources that are not purely journalistic sources. They're oftentimes like think tanks. They have a point of view they want to get across, but they can often do some really interesting research. For example, the Peterson Institute is quite good, I think, in some of their studies on international trade. I love podcasts. It ensures I never have a quiet moment. Never have a quiet moment. I can always be listening to a podcast when I'm not listening to my wife. She never has a quiet moment listening to me. Okay, let's start with some big news. Of course, what could be bigger than the fact that 1/4 of our government is not working, or at least 1/2 of 1/4 of our government is not working. Now, those of you who are more conservative might say that generally government doesn't work at all for you, but actually there is a government that works. And I don't know about you, but I'm concerned when I see health inspectors saying that they're not working, checking and looking for food stamps or eating just packaged goods. That kind of concerns me. We're at the 32nd day of the shutdown. Doesn't appear that this will be the week in which it's solved. The next federal payday is Friday. So the processing of those payrolls had to be initiated or completed today to get them to the next level up. Obviously, if there aren't people working or aren't people there to process it, it doesn't get done on Not only the panda in the zoo is awaiting a decision, I think we're all are awaiting a decision. And there will be some action. I think the president did move the agenda somewhat forward by at least coming up with a counter proposal back to Democrats. And hopefully they'll find some way to get the government running again. Because one of the aspects of the government not running, provides at first a minor drag on the economy, and then the longer the government is partially shut down, the more drag it has on the economy. Because people aren't working, they're not productive. They're not buying at the same level. The federal contractors and their employees aren't out doing things that generate economic activity and then value, and they can use that value to buy other things. Plus, it appears that it's starting to have an impact on how consumers feel about the direction of the economy. And that's very bad news in America, where almost 70% of economic activity is based upon consumer decisions. A very high percentage when you consider in some countries that number is 30 to 50%. So when consumers don't think optimistically about the future, they tend to not do something, like buy things, and that affects other parts of the economy. So we'll see. Last Friday, the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index fell to the lowest point during this administration. So that's one possible sign. But if we get out of this, all that will be in the rearview mirror. If this gets prolonged into February, we start getting into federally subsidized rent checks or rent vouchers not getting out to people. We get into March, we get into the food stamps not getting out to people. So we'll see how long, who comes up with a way to get out of this. We have problems. Great Britain has, at this point, even a bigger problem. Our problem gets big, but it's not nearly as big as to how are they going to get out of, or are they going to get out of the European community and that common market they share. And they seem to be in no better shape now than they were a year ago. The question came up at the last class on the politics class on the size of the Russian economy versus the size of the relative to other economies. If you use, I just go to the CIA. I thought they would know. And I tapped into the CIA. I hacked right in. Well, it's their public website. And apparently there's still people at the CIA working, which is probably good news, right? You want those people working at the CIA. There's two measurements to measure economic activity in an economy. One is what they call nominal GDP, and that is usually expressed in dollars. And it's really your ability, the value of that economy in dollars, that those dollars can then buy things in other economies. But there is another way, and it's the way the CIA has taken to measure it, and The Economist magazine measures it, in what they call purchasing power parity. And that is how much does that value generated by that economy result in purchasing power within the economy. So not surprising to many of you that in countries in which medical services are paid for or provided by the national government, the cost of medical services that you can buy is a lot lower cost out of your budget than in an economy like ours, in which medical services cost more. And so if you use that, the United Kingdom is the 10th largest economy. If you use purchasing power parity, the US is the 3rd largest economy in the world, with the European Union number 2. Of course, the European Union minus the UK would take it down below the US. So we'll be number 2 on personal power. So there's a lot at stake with what happens with the UK in terms of how they get out of the European community. Russia, by the way, is the 7th largest economy based upon purchasing power parity and about the 10th largest in terms of nominal GDP. Okay, well, they had a fun time in the last couple of weeks in the UK. The Prime Minister had a vote on her Brexit plan, which means British exit from the European community. That's why I call it Brexit. And then she lost in a greater margin than any prime minister since World War II. I mean, she has the distinction of she brought a bill before her parliament. Remember, she said, as the parliamentary form of government they have in the UK, the prime minister is party controls that body, selects her, and she lost that vote overwhelmingly. Well, actually, it goes back to World War I. I'm sorry, it was the biggest defeat since World War I. And Britain's had some big defeats. This guy has a tough job. He's the Speaker of the House of Commons.
The news of it, the news of it. Say aye. On the contrary, no.
So, in many ways, it looks like the British government is in somewhat disrepair now. The Prime Minister did get a vote of confidence despite losing the one vote. I think in large measure because her party and the Northern Ireland party that affiliates with her did not want to have a new election. And they figured the voters are probably pretty upset. Whether they would vote them out, they probably would reduce the majority of the Conservative Party for sure. By the way, the Speaker is an interesting fellow. Even though by tradition he does not have a political party when he serves as Speaker, he is affiliated with the Labour Party. So that makes it a very interesting time when he calls for order. Matter of fact, he made a ruling that the Parliament has a right to be able to amend the government's Brexit bill once they have something that is ready to come back for another vote. Theresa May just has no good choices. She went before, after that vote in Parliament, she said she would meet with the various parliamentary parties over the weekend to try to see if she can come back with something more acceptable. She came back yesterday and she said, well, they didn't find any way forward, but she's going back to Brussels to try to see if she can get any more concessions out of the European community, which is going to be a big challenge. We'll see what happens. Let's talk about the U.S. economy. One of the bright spots in the U.S. economy, with one caveat, was consumer prices. Consumer prices have started to stabilize again, in large measure because oil prices have been able to stabilize or actually go down. Now, and consumer prices allow increases in wages to actually result in a real wage increase. If your wages only go up as fast as inflation, there is no increase in the real purchasing power you have. If they don't go up as fast, they go down. I can remember one time getting a 12% raise in a year. Unfortunately, the year was like 1977 or 76, and the inflation was at 21%. That wasn't that great. The only problem is in Los Angeles, Orange County, for some reason, inflation went higher. Mainly driven, I think, it's driven by a number of issues, but hopefully that's just a glitch in the system that, in the surveys, that we won't have a high inflation rate here. We talked about, usually in our classes, about the employment report. It's probably one of the best judges on the status of the economy. The December jobs report was very, very positive. Last week, the California economic report that is derived in part from that came out, and the California report was good too, 24,000 added jobs. The joblessness in the 58 counties of California was the sixth lowest in Orange County, or Orange County had the sixth lowest unemployment rate. So that's great for Orange County. And a matter of fact, that the jobs lost during the Great Recession have basically been caught up in terms of gross number of jobs. The ones lost in the Great Recession, now finally we are higher in employment, taking into account changes in demographic factors than before. Now, if you take into account seniors, people like us who are no longer in the economy, or most of us are no longer in the economy in terms of being employed, the actual rate of employment is even higher than the pre-recession level. Matter of fact, a lot of the decline in the U.S. labor participation rate, and that is the percentage of people within certain age categories, whatever index you use, who are no longer working. If you just attribute it to age, you can see in that chart that it's mostly any reductions have been in the fact that the labor force is getting younger in terms of as the baby boomers move out. If you look at the U.S., however, there's still plenty of room to go. In 2006, 76% of adults, males and females, between the ages of 15 and 64, were in the labor force. 3/4. We're at 72, maybe 73 now. That's higher than France, but look at Japan, where you have 78%, and Germany 78%, in which labor force participation in those countries are still higher than ours. And you can see a big uptick in Japan. And what has happened in Japan is that women are working longer. Women have been working longer. They have broken some of the traditional, not stereotypes, but patterns in order to work longer. And Japan has an active policy to restructure certain jobs to allow people to work longer. And that made sense because Japan had very much of a drag in people retiring. And the public pensions costs kept going up and up and up, so the Japanese government went to the major employers and some small employers and say, you've got to find jobs that people, you know, after age 60 can effectively do. You know, redo the job structure, and they have done a reasonably good job on that. But as much as we talk about payrolls, the economists would like to point out that payrolls are a trailing indicator of the economy. And a trailing indicator is something that happens when something else happens. It is not indicative of the future direction of the economy. And one example is this chart that shows, or attempts to show, that jobs were up until a recession was about to hit, and then they just took a nosedive real quickly. So it's good news that payrolls are up, but they're not necessarily predictive. How many of you know a teacher? How many are you former teachers? Or married to a teacher? Yeah, a good number. Well, this probably doesn't shock you, does it? This headline, teachers are leaving jobs at record rates. And the challenge is some of the fixed costs in teaching have become higher and higher, and public investment hasn't kept up, and the recession led to a lot of salary freezes and benefit cutbacks, right? The demographic changes in terms of age and more people being on pensions, more retired employees and active employees. It's interesting. If you look at retirement reports required by most pension plans, you find a number. How many people are active employees and how many people are retired? And in many parts of America, both in education and government, you have as many retired people or beneficiaries as you do active people. That's a big drag on trying to find money. Also, in a good economy, there are alternatives. I mean, I think one of the big problems the federal government faces is sooner or later, if the shutdown continues, more and more of those federal employees will say, I don't want this. We're in a full employment economy. I can go get a job. Particularly those like in the Washington and Virginia area or in the high-tech fields. Go work for Amazon. Go work for, Google. So teachers are leaving their jobs at record numbers. The quit rate is up. And of course, we have the big LA teacher strike going on, which I understand, listening to news reports today, they ended a 21-hour negotiating session with at least the mayor of Los Angeles, who was mediating that, said that they made good progress. So maybe they're a few days away.
They settled.
They did settle. Okay, good. Well, that's great news, because when students aren't attending classes, there's a major reduction in revenue unless you can get the state to somehow forgive you on the loss of average daily attendance during that time. Because the school district was losing millions a day in state aid because student attendance was about a third of the average attendance.
Was there a spike in crime rate?
I don't know. I'm sure those social statistics are going to come out. They were losing $20 million a day. And so many of the students in the LA Unified School District receive one or more of their meals during the week at school because of the high percentage of impoverished students who attend LA Unified. So good, that's good news. Well, here's not good news. PG&E, that doesn't serve this area, is getting ready to go bankrupt. They got rid of their CEO. It's a real, and one bad result of that, of course, is when they come out of bankruptcy protection, One, the state could actually go with someone else to provide that service. Or they have to pass along well, let me tell you more. Let me show you something. Let me see if I get this up. This is the area covered by PG&E. It goes from south of Bakersfield, all the way up to Reading. Looks like Eureka area, Yreka, big area in the state. Oops, here. And
the utility company PG&E, tasked with keeping the lights on for 60 million Californians, said it's planning to file for bankruptcy.
One of the nation's largest utilities is on the brink of bankruptcy.
PG&E shares are down more than 48%. Many are wondering why the utility kept the electricity going and whether it played a role in what's now the deadliest wildfire in state history.
The company's equipment is responsible for starting 1,500 fires in recent years. That's more than one a day on average. The fires have resulted in dozens of deaths, the destruction of hundreds of thousands of acres, and as much as $30 billion of potential liability for the company, according to analysts. So, is there anything the country's 10th biggest utility system could have done to reduce its wildfire risk? Well, maybe. Utility companies across the country have fortified, updated, and protected their power delivery systems. Here's how. One of the most obvious changes is to beef up physical infrastructure. That's called hardening the grid. High winds, snow, wayward branches, and wildlife like squirrels and woodpeckers can damage wires and poles, increasing the risk of fires and outages. This goes for dry climates like California, where a historic drought preceded mega fires in 2017 and 2018. Southern states are exposed to high winds during hurricane season, and much of the Northeast and Midwest are subject to heavy snowstorms. Grid hardening looks different in different parts of the country, but some experts recommend PG&E bury their power lines underground, out of the way of branches and squirrels. Duke Energy has buried sections of their lines that are particularly vulnerable. They call it targeted undergrounding. But the cost of burying power lines underground is enormous, and it would ultimately fall on customers. Other less expensive updates include replacing wooden poles with stronger and more fire-resistant concrete, steel, or fiberglass poles, making poles taller so that surrounding trees have less of a chance of landing on wires if a tree falls, and insulating power lines with a plastic material that protects the line. The next option is to deploy technologies that gather information and automate some safety responses. San Diego Gas and Electric has installed sensors that can detect when something goes wrong on a line or has interrupted the power flow. If a wire falls, it can automatically shut down the line before it hits the ground to prevent fire. It's also helped install a network of cameras on high peaks that make it easier to spot fires and respond to them. PG&E has some cameras, but not many. And a Florida utility installed weather monitoring systems following hurricanes in 2004 and 2005. These stations measure wind speed and direction, temperature and humidity to assess fire risk. When conditions are bad, they can move to the final option. During potentially dangerous weather conditions, utility companies have the option of shutting off power transmission lines, turning off electricity for their customers, and minimizing the chance of fire. In October 2018, PG&E cut power to some customers on short notice, saying it would help reduce the risk of wildfire during extreme winds and keep PG&E customers safe. Their customers complained a lot. Then, on November 6th, the utility tried again, and after another uproar from customers, it changed its mind and decided it would not proceed with plans for another public safety power cutoff. The Camp Fire, which became the deadliest fire in California's history, started later that day.
So the moral of the story on all of us who live in Southern California, and we certainly are subject to disasters down here, is that there's a major cost that's going to have to be paid sooner or later by our utilities, whether it's caused by earthquakes or particularly those utilities that can cause of fire and other damages. So let's go on to something else. Coming up, probably one of the biggest economic challenges facing us and the world is what happens with China. What happens with the trade with China? Do we reach a deal? If we don't reach a deal with China, what will that do to global confidence? What will it do to consumer confidence and business confidence in the U.S.? Certainly the China trade surplus deficit has gone up. China has the surplus. The president has given a deadline for completing negotiations with China. Some progress has been made, and some progress hasn't been made. Apparently, China put on the table that a plan to buy more U.S. goods, probably just making sure that they come from places elsewhere. Instead of buying them from the European community, you buy them from the U.S. And matter of fact, they claim they could eliminate the deficit in 5 years. But that's mainly consumers buying things. And if the consumers don't buy the goods, then enforcement of that will be very difficult. And on the issues of the technology transfer between American businesses and intellectual property of American businesses and the Chinese, apparently there's been very little progress made, or at least that's the informal report. And just the other day, China announced, I think it was yesterday, China announced its lowest growth since 1990. Now their growth rate is still much higher than ours, 6%, but we're not sure that they are giving out accurate numbers either, because they control everything. They control everything in an economy. You can see how they've gone from a high of 15% growth in the economy in 2017, right as the world was moving into a recession, and now down to about 6%, and the amount of investment in the economy went up during the recession, and it's been going down since then. What happens in China affects the world, just as what happens with the U.S. economy affects the world. What happened to the European community economy, being the three big economies. And the unfortunate aspect of this is the world needs economic stimulants from somewhere, whether from the U.S., from China, from the European community, and at this point in time, to avoid going into recessions in certain parts of the world. Matter of fact, yesterday the International Monetary Fund reduced their forecast of the world economy, moving it down from 3.7 to 3.5%. Still, as this chart shows, China still has the highest growth, or projected growth in their economy, followed by developing countries, and then the U.S., the Eurozone, and Japan below that. Okay, let's move on. Financial markets. Financial markets had a up and down year in 2018. But so far in January, with the exception of today, the stock markets have had the best January on record, or on record in the last 30 years. In fact, as of the close of the stock market on Friday, the stock market wasn't open yesterday, we were up 10 percentage points in the month of January, had rebounded that far. But we're still almost 5% lower, the stock market 5% lower than it was a year ago. So Now, in 2019, you shrewd investors who invested in cocoa or wheat or corn had a good year, because cocoa went up, stock related to cocoa, 27%, and wheat 17%. Those of you who invested your hard-earned money in the Argentine peso, however, saw that go down 50%. Sugar went down 20% in terms of an investment category. Coffee, 19%. And my favorite, lean hogs, went down 15%, as opposed to fat hog. How many of you ever heard of this man? Good. How many of you invest money in Vanguard? Okay, almost the same. This man basically popularized and in large degree invented consumer-friendly investments through index funds. And he had 5 principles. He died the other day. Founder of the financial giant Vanguard. He had 5 main principles. One was, to the extent possible, keep invested. Just keep invested until you need the money. Don't read the headlines and get the money out and then wait too long to get the money back in. Wise investors don't try to outsmart the market. Second one was beware of the experts. He points out that the money market and money fund experts rarely do better than just putting money into an index fund and letting it ride, but will take out major fees. That was his other thing. Third point, keep the cost down. Keep the cost way down. See, in financial advisors, sometimes who are not fiduciaries will, remember, they make money when you buy, they make money when you sell. Make money when you buy, sell. Don't make money when you hold. So there's a big incentive to say, oh, you should move your money over to something else. Keep costs down. The fourth one, don't get emotional. Invest in a diverse selection of stocks and bonds. Trust the arithmetic and stick to it. Impulse is your enemy. And his fifth, my next principle. He has his principle. I have one principle. Don't divorce. Anytime in life, but particularly when you retire. Now, sometimes there's no choice, and sometimes there's the best reasons in the world, and the heart wants what the heart wants, and I can't live with that person anymore now that I'm home with that person. But let me give you one example. Now, probably the Stover principle won't be remembered as well as the ones for Jack Bogle, but I give one bit of evidence here. These two formerly happy people, the Bezos. As a family unit, they were the world's the wealthiest people because they mostly owned, they had large shares of Amazon.
Poisoning's cheaper.
Then, according to rumor, he and she kind of cooled down, and maybe this happened. Now they decide to have a nice, amicable divorce, but they have all this money. They have all these interests, from Amazon to media holdings, including the Washington Post, large real estate holdings. They have a rocket launching business. They have homes and investments throughout the world. So my principle is, if you can avoid it. Now, by the way, They go from having the largest individual holdings in Amazon to having the second and third largest holdings. Guess who will now have the largest holding in Amazon? Vanguard. Those two stories go hand in hand, by the way.
Does your wife have the same principle?
I always hope so. I always hope so. Okay, let's go to consumer personal technology and entertainment news. Here I am checking the prices out at the grocery store the other day. Okay. Chicken has become a very, very popular protein. Chicken. Matter of fact, 25 billion of the 30 billion land animals living on farms is the mighty chicken. Euban gobbles so. This is from the Economist magazine, which reports. Human gobbles so many chickens that the birds now account for 23 of the 30 billion land animals living on farms. According to a recent paper by at the University of Leicester, the total mass of farm chickens exceed that of all other birds on the planet combined.
That's Leicester, by the way.
Leicester? Okay, thank you. This is a chart showing meat consumption in the what we would call the first world, the OECD countries. Chicken now, in terms of consumption by weight, it has now exceeded pork and beef. They've went from being number 2 in consumption behind pork to well in advance of it. So the mighty chicken. How many of you heard about this ad? The Gillette ad. How many of you have a strong opinion on that ad? Well, what is that ad? Well, the reason why I put this on, not because I want to get people upset about the idea of masculinity, but because why does a business put out an ad on a social issue? It's a very interesting concept, and several do. Sometimes because they think that's what they need to do. Here's something on this.
Bullying.
The Me Too movement against sexual
Toxic
harassment.
masculinity. Is this the best a man can get? Is it?
These are opinions by Democrats and Republicans about whether they like this ad or not during the
It's been
course of
going
the
on
ad.
far too long. We can't laugh it off.
What I actually think she's trying to say.
Making the same old excuses.
Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys.
But something finally changed.
Allegations regarding sexual assault and sexual harassment.
But she says he's
And there will be no going back. Because we believe in the best in men.
Men need to hold other men accountable.
Wow, sweetie.
Come on.
To say the right thing. To act the right way.
Bro, not cool. Not cool.
Some already are. In ways big
Yo, men.
and small.
I am strong.
But some is not enough.
It's not how we treat each other, man. Okay?
Because the boys watching today will be the men of tomorrow.
That's going to be a very interesting Super Bowl ad. I don't know if it's going to run on the Super Bowl, but it's a very interesting consumer ad in which it attempts to sell the corporation's views or virtues through an advertising medium. Doesn't say then go out and buy Gillette blades. Consumer Electronics Show, or the Consumer Electronics Show, is the big show for nerds every year in the U.S. The big show for nerds. And it's basically closed to the public, open to people in the trade and people in the media. But it's where some of the best electronics are displayed, many of which never actually reach the consumer. So it's always good to see what might be coming to our shelves in the future or may never. Let me give you some highlights from this year. Consumer Technology Association Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
There are three things you need to understand about CES. One, most of what's here won't be for sale anytime soon, and a lot of it never will be. Two, CES is really more of a show and tell than anything. It's just people bringing cool stuff they figured out how to make. Three, none of that really matters. CES is full of weird, fun ideas and some really, really bad products. But it's also lots of cool ideas about how technology is shaping our lives, sometimes even for the better. Like this foldable phone from Royal, the FlexPi, which can either be a tablet or a phone, depending on how you hold it, or a hat, depending on how you wear it. Flexible displays like this can help make everything from clothes to cars smarter and turn your phone into the full-on Netflix binge machine it was always meant to be. And this, the Bell Nexus Air Taxi, which uses 6 rotors and can carry 4 passengers, and yes, it really does fly. It's somewhere between a drone and a plane, and they say by the mid-2020s you might even be able to call an Uber and get one of these instead. And there's the Breadbot, this robotic machine that can make 10 loaves of bread an hour, and they're used in grocery stores and for the military, and honestly, it's delicious. All you do is add ingredients, wait a little while, and then choose your loaf like a vending machine. It cuts down on delivery costs and means fresh bread is actually fresh. And there's the Otter Pop, which is a protective case for your iPhone that also holds pop sockets. And I love pop sockets. These swappable attachments make your phone so much easier to hold in one hand, especially when you're typing or taking a picture. And there's Fight Camp, which is an in-home boxing workout system with connected classes that's kind of like Peloton, except you get to hit stuff. You put the gear in your living room, and sensors in the gloves track all your punches and movements. It's even a pretty good body weight workout system. Just wear more workout-appropriate clothes than I did. And routers, like this one from Netgear, which brings a super fast 5G connection to all your devices, even your car. 5G is the next generation of mobile internet, and it's starting to roll out in some places this year. When it comes to you, this router could bring the fastest internet you've ever had. And this rollable LG TV. Yeah, it's rollable. Instead of a big, ugly rectangle sitting on your wall all the time, LG's OLED-R TV can just wind back into its base when you're done watching. Or if you pause it partway down, it can be a control system for your music or your smart home. And this new delivery robot called Lumo Delivery from 9bot Segway. We're likely to see autonomous vehicles bringing us stuff well before they're driving us around. And this is a good example. It's designed for an office building or a mall as a way to zip goods from one place to another. And there's the Solar Cow, which uses solar power and portable batteries to make kids go to school in Africa instead of having to work. The solar panel, located at a school, charges a bunch of portable batteries that kids can take home at night to charge their phones, flashlights, and more. They can come back each day instead of having to spend hours walking to a charging shop and recharge while they learn. Will you buy most of this stuff here at CES? Probably not. Will anyone? Yeah. But there's a lot of technology here that might make it into a device you someday own, whether it's a new way to get around town, or a new way to work out, or just a new TV. CES is just the world's biggest show and tell. The future's here, but sometimes you gotta get on your hovercraft and fly around a little to find it. Oh my God. Please let me get off this thing.
Okay, that's the Consumer Electronics Show. They also had a modular TV that you put up like tile, and you build the TV, and it integrates itself. So if you want it to be one size, one moment, it can be this, or you can add some tiles, make it a little wider, what have you. Now, will that ever reach the market? Well, I don't know, but at least the technology is being displayed. Here's something sad. How many of you went to Disneyland the last year? How many of you went with other adults only? Okay, good. Well, Disneyland's getting more expensive. Always getting more expensive. It's incredible how expensive Disneyland has become. They're increasing their price up to, depending upon the category, whether it be a pass or a daily pass, whether it's a peak period or a non-peak period, almost as much in some cases, 25%. And you can see how fast they have gone up, that it's more than tripled since year 2000. And in particular, in the last few years, you can see almost a straight line up to this. I think this is one cost. But people keep going. And as Yogi Berra would say, nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. And they keep going. And Disney, in part, justifies the increase, is that the increase will improve the customer experience, not only by providing more money to do and improve their amusements, but to reduce the number of people going. But it seems like the higher they increase it, the more people that go. Wouldn't you like to be in a business with that problem? Wouldn't you like it? How many of you fly in an airplane recently? Well, the Wall Street Journal did an annual study on the best and worst U.S. airlines, and here's their findings for this year. And they gave Delta the #1 rank for being the best airlines. And they were high in on-time arrivals, canceled flights. That's an inverse. The lower, the better. They were second in extreme delays. They were, fifth in tarmac delays, 2-hour tarmac delays. They were third in mishandled baggage. The lowest in involuntary bumping, and mid-range in complaint. And you can see the top 3 would be Delta, Alaska, and Southwest. The bottom 3, United, American, and Frontier. I'm sure your actual experience is based upon whether or not you had a 2-hour tarmac delay or if you got your luggage or what have you, but that's their ratings for this year. Let's move on. Isn't this sad? If you drink, that the booze makers turn to soft stuff. They're having problems that Americans have slightly reduced their love of beer. Now, there's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't be drinking at all, and for all the health reasons. But for those of you who view it as a business or as a consumer, beer is still the big alcohol consumption. In 78.5 of all alcohol consumed in America is beer. However, in terms of long-term trends, the hard stuff is going up in terms of consumption, and fairly significantly up, along with wine, and beer is going down. You can do your own surveys to see if that's true in your life. Let's talk about video delivery, programming delivery. There's 3 ways, I think there's only 3 ways, our technologists in the audience can help me, in which you get entertainment at your home. One way is via, and this slide is wrong, via antenna. And that's the over-air broadcast television. The second way is via satellite networks. And you either get that through a cable connection or a telephone connection or a direct satellite receiving dish on your roof. Or 3, via the internet, so-called streaming internet, either on a continuous basis or on a download of a program. three different ways. Today we're going to be talking about streaming because this may be the big year of streaming. 2019 may be one of the key years. Streaming media. That's the technology that is defined as streaming pre-recorded media file like videos and music, and it goes from a computer server to your home. And some of the more popular brands of streaming: Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime Video, HBO Now, PBS has their own streaming video, Crackle, and Showtime are some of the more popular ones. But Amazon is debuting a new streaming service that will be free, completely free, but will be ad-supported this year. And it will have some of the old network programs like Gilligan's Isle on it. Hulu said that their base of subscribers grew 48% last year as more people streamed. NBC announced that they're going to start their own video service that will be ad-supported and free to 52 million paid TV subscribers. What that means is that you'll get it probably from your used to be called cable company, but really video provider, as an additional choice. But it will be streamed down from the internet, and it won't be presented like a normal channel. And others are apparently going to debut services this year. Apple apparently is going to spend $1 billion this year on doing original programming. And the cost apparently will be free if you own an Apple device. For those who like the comic or the graphic novel world, DC Universe will be one that will be TV shows, movies, and comics for $7.99 a month. Disney, of course, this is the big one. Disney will have their own streaming video. That apparently will cost somewhat lower than Netflix's cost, just to try to get market share at least in the first year. Disney will have both their library of films and TV programs plus additional original programs. But by far the big leader is Netflix. Or at least Netflix starts the year as the big leader. They're the dominant platform at 39% of users of services. But online services such as Netflix or Hulu now account for a third of all original scripted entertainment programs. That's way up, Gesundheit. In 2011, they did 33 original series. Last year, they did 160 and booming out more and more. Netflix has over 9 million subscribers, and their subscription count keeps getting bigger and bigger, both in the US and particularly internationally. And they are spending more and more money in doing original content. 2018, over $12 billion invested in original programming. To pay for that, Netflix is implementing price increases. And they have a variety of price plans now, depending upon whether or not you want it in high definition or in regular definition, whether or not you just want one person concurrently streaming, or 2 people, or 4 people. And that's very kind of like a cool way of doing it, because people were giving out their passwords and username to other people. And Netflix, instead of vigorously fighting that, they said, fine, you can have, one or two concurrently streaming one. But once you go beyond that, we'll just stop. The third one won't get it. So you pay for, so you help us enhance our reach by giving out your passwords and usernames to others. Of all the internet traffic, all the traffic that flows on the internet, 15% is just attributable to Netflix. 15% of the traffic. Think of that if they were on the freeway and every sixth car or truck had Netflix on it. It is so dominant. And it's dominant in America. It is number 2 in Europe. And number 3 in the Asian Rim countries. One of the challenges as the streaming services get more popular, they are somewhat reducing the power of the broadcast networks, the so-called free networks. So hardly any broadcast network is ever free anymore because they charge for carry now. And the viewership of those networks keep going down and down and down. This is an example. And the choice of people on whether they go to a broadcast network like NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, or the CW network almost depends on your age. Look at this chart in which the preference among young people have become increasingly for streaming services such as Netflix. Gets more and more in terms of live TV versus streaming TV among young people. This is going to be a big year. However, pay TV services like HBO, cable, satellite, and some of the telecoms are seeing their revenues drop. So they're having a less successful year. And that brings up a concept in economics called creative destruction. Have you ever heard that term, creative destruction? That is a key concept of our capitalist system, is that, yes, new businesses, new technologies, new competition will lead to the decline and oftentimes disappearance of a product or a company, because the capital will flow from the declining company to the competitive company, and workers will be displaced. And the good news is that the economy keeps renewing itself. The bad news is for people that work for those businesses, they lose their jobs if they haven't jumped to a new technology or a new firm, or what have you. So what's happening now in the streaming video area is I think, will be a classic case of creative destruction, and the economy will be better for it, but many individual businesses won't be. Okay, let's move on. Got a lot here, but let's move on. The auto industry is starting to have problems, particularly the passenger car industry. Passenger car industry, there's an article, let's see, was this the LA Times or the Wall Street Journal? One of them this morning. LA Times, parts of the auto industry making sedans are essentially in a recession, with plants closures, layoffs, or reduced shifts, going from 3 shifts to 2 shifts to 1 shift. of workers. Tesla is struggling. At the same time, it's finally meeting its production goals, laying off staff. What was it, 7 or 8? They cut 7% of their, or intend to cut 7% of their full-time staff in order to reduce costs and reduce the price. And part of it is the loss of tax credits for the purchase of electrical vehicles and getting ready to compete in other parts of the world. They went to China and reached a deal in China to build Teslas there. They got certified in the last month in the European community to build and sell Teslas there. So car makers are scrambling to get ready for reduced demand in the near term. Passenger car sales in the U.S. have plateaued. In China, they're actually going down, but until recently, and still, China was the fastest growing market for passenger vehicles, still is, but it's starting to go down. You can see in this chart the 3 major markets for passenger vehicles. How many of you use prescription drugs? Okay, who doesn't? Good news. The healthy people raise their hands. Well, some of the common generic, in some cases, drugs have had some major price increases. And they will start being passed along through insurance plans and through pharmacies, what have you. In particular types of drugs, increases contraception drugs since 1997. Now that's a long period, but still up 190%. Menopause drugs, 165. Allergy drugs actually went down in cost. Depression drugs, not that anyone is depressed, 383. Infection, dealing with infections, respiratory, all up. Diabetes, central nervous system, cancer, drugs. All.
That's advertising, not the cost of drugs.
Oh, advertising, thank you very much. That is the cost of advertising. And that, in large measure, is the reason why the cost of drugs have gone up. In some cases, the cost attributable to drugs to advertising can be as much as 70% of the drug cost. Now, because think of the TV ads. Think of the TV ads. And here's some specific examples of drugs that have been announced increases in the last few months, going up. Let's talk a minute and see how much time. Okay, we got some time. Let's talk about marijuana. Anyone heard of marijuana? Marijuana is increasingly legal in the world, particularly in North America, with Canada now being legal in Canada. 36 countries, marijuana is legal. It's legal in either for medicinal purposes or recreational, meaning any purpose, in the states on this chart indicated in green. The dark green is the recreational, and the lighter green is the medical uses. The estimated spending on either legal or either recreational or medical marijuana in 2018 is estimated at $12 billion. And some of the major companies are now going in, particularly we see this in Canada. Canada, you don't have the problem in which you have the federal law says one thing and the state law says something else. So Canada is a pretty clean model, but also gives you a sense of where businesses are going that may be going wanting to have a share of the marijuana industry. Tobacco companies, such as Altria, has an investment now, about a 45% stake in the Canada-based Kronos Group. Novartis, one of the big drug companies, inked a deal with another company, a beer company, and a couple of beer companies are buying interest in the marijuana area. Now, let me make sure you know I'm not, nor OLLI or Cal State Fullerton are endorsing marijuana use, but it is an area in which you see a lot of economic activity, and you can, and the interest in legalization has certainly become more and more a political issue. Millennials, 74% want the marijuana legal. Baby boomers, our generation, 54%. You and you and you and you, but not you and you and you in this room. And the silent generation, the generation before the baby boomers, are the only generation on this chart that remains opposed, but has almost more than doubled in their support, percentage support in the past. So what's happening in California? 547 retailers have cannabis licenses at the end of 2018, 1,009 distributors, 52 licenses for testing, 70 licenses for event organizers, 639 manufacturers, 477 cultivators licenses have been granted by the state. In terms of tax generation, they haven't met their tax goals, but they certainly are generating some taxes in the millions. The third quarter of last year had 93.1 million in total taxes generated from cannabis sales. California, among the states that are legal, probably taxes cannabis lower than any other, almost all the other states, compared to the state of Washington, in which sales and excise tax is about 37% of the price consumers pay. So that's a growing business. Let's talk about housing. This is brand new. This just came out this morning. Existing home sales slid to a 3-year low. Existing. This came out from the National Association of Realtors. So the housing market, this is on a national basis. In the total homes sold was 5.34 million in 2018, the worst year since 2015. And there's growing evidence that in many of the new homes that have been built, that there have been price decreases occurring. The builders have made some minor price decreases. Some cases more than minor, but in many cases like 4 or 5%. And that's generally not what builders do. Builders like to go up anytime they do a new subdivision, up another one, up another notch. More evidence that maybe it's not the demand for housing that is the issue, but the price of housing that may be the issue, at least in California. And year-to-year changes in even the cost of housing have moderated. Still in Orange County, the average price of a home sold in Orange County, $719,000. That increased 2.7% year to year, but the number of sales went down 11%. Los Angeles County, 600,000, price up 5, sales down 15. So there are some challenges in the real estate market. Let's talk about retailers. This was in the Wall Street Journal, I believe today. JCPenney faces a do or die year. Now JCPenney hasn't seemed to have had a good year since 2000. But this may be their do or die year, at least according to this one article today in the Wall Street Journal. And if you look at it, their price, if you held JCPenney stock, you would not be very happy. You went from $12 a share in 2016 down to less than $2 a share. Not a good direction. Let's go back a tad here. Net profits and loss, they've been in the negative for most of the last 3 years. And revenues changed from the previous year down. So a lot of reasons to think that Penny's is in trouble. Sears will have some stores coming out of bankruptcy. The person that drove them into bankruptcy, or arguably drove them into bankruptcy, bought them out of bankruptcy, and will try to operate a lesser number of stores. It's hard to imagine that these, we're going to have big turnarounds in either Penny's or Sears. I hope so for all the people involved, but they are really a trouble. David Bridals went into bankruptcy and came out very quickly because they had to come out very quickly because they didn't want to lose the summer wedding sales. And one of their new strategies, but they have a whole new ownership group. They went into bankruptcy under one ownership group, came out of bankruptcy with a different ownership group. The new ownership group says that they're essentially going to keep their stores, and they're going to widen the number of sizes, or increase the number of sizes available. They didn't say, are they smaller people or larger people? Probably, I think, larger people. But they emerge. We'll see if they can survive. Gymboree and Crazy 8 are entering bankruptcy, and they apparently have no immediate buyer. But that happens after every holiday season. Some retailer goes under. One of the things happening is that the number of storefronts, the number of stores per capita, you use maybe 100,000, whatever per capita base you want to use. The number of stores are generally going down in many areas, such as sporting goods, number of stores down 17% from 1990 to 2007, which is the most recent report. Furniture down a little bit, newsstands down, bookstores down big time, hardware stores down big time, shoe stores down big time. The ones that have gone up, nail salon, pet care, cosmetics, small increase in restaurant, a big increase in gyms, a small decrease in supermarkets. So that's another way of looking at the retail community is how many stores, what type of stores, a shopping center owner can tell you a good thing about the nature of the retail community in that trading area just by the leases that they're able to make and who are interested in leasing. And then we had this issue occurrence in West Los Angeles, the West Side Pavilion, which I know I've been in. Have any of you been in the West Side Pavilion one time? They completely are going out of the retail business. They sold the West Side Pavilion to Google. And Google will now put in their offices and other uses in that West Side Pavilion retail changing to commercial office space. Pension news, we're awaiting this decision. This is one of the biggest decisions of the last half century, I think, regarding California public pensions, is this case before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court had oral arguments of it. They have the briefs. Any time now a decision may come out regarding Cal Fire Local 2881 versus CalPERS. And that is on the issue of whether or not the legislature could reduce pension benefits after they are during the term of active employees. What the Supreme Court says in this case may be used in a number of other cases. There's a whole series of cases before the state Supreme Court. Okay, let's end with this. Despite what we may feel, in many ways the world's getting better. And sometimes we miss that point. I mean, I know we look at, the entertainment sometimes, or language, or our perceptions of morality, and we may disagree that the world is getting better, but it is demonstratively getting better economically and health-wise. Less people are dying, lack of nutrition, or lack of getting needed drugs than ever before in our civilization. The number of lives lost to violence way down across the world. Now, thanks to contemporary media, and certainly thanks to the internet, we can hear about and see the latest, freeway fleeing suspect on a freeway chase in Fort Lauderdale, and think, wow, that's, must be a lot of people just going down the freeway away from the police. Or we can see someone in great misery, or we can see horrific things happening all over the world. But a good scholarly economic case can be made that the world is actually getting much, much better. The number of people who die because of poor sanitation, number of childhood deaths, or deaths during the first few years, and in childbirth too. Great progress against AIDS and other epidemics. Matter of fact, the number of people who are in the middle class keeps increasing worldwide. The world is getting better. Now, of course, we look at our own situations, the situations of our families and our communities and our states and nations, and we can take exception at, but looking at the great trend over the last 50 years, it's hard to make the case that the world is getting worse. Matter of fact, the other day, Bill Gates talked about this, and one of the books Bill Gates always points to as one of his favorites is this book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. And this is a book that talks about the decrease in violence in the world. But Gates did this article the other day in the Wall Street Journal about the best investment he ever made. And he said the best investment, not just from the viewpoint of the heart, but the viewpoint of the brain, was an investment he made and his foundation made in delivering drugs to people in need. And he said there was a great problem in the world in getting some of the drugs that can solve horrendous illnesses actually to some of the places in the world. The drugs can be developed, but they don't get to the people that can use them. Now, that's not generally a problem in first world countries like the US or like Europe, but it can become a major problem in third world countries. And by investing in in the medicine, transportation, and delivery businesses. It said they'd had the best investment return that you ever had. And it was not only in terms of cost effectiveness, but in terms of lives solved, lives saved. So there's a lot of reasons come out of today and say, oh, gee, what's going to happen with China? You know, do I have to buy another streaming service? I hope I don't have any money in automobiles, passenger automobile sales businesses. I think the thing we can come away with today, and I would like you to come away today, in many ways, at least from the economic view, we're getting to be a better world. And I think that's a good thing to celebrate. So thank you. See you in this class in 4 weeks. See you in other classes every week. Bye-bye.